He placed the last can of milk on the counter and whispered, "My son can go one more night." But before the shopkeeper could take it back, a rich widow quietly stepped forward, and what she did next left the entire town speechless. Stay until the end, because this act of kindness changed two broken lives forever. And if you love heartwarming Wild West stories about hope, compassion, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The little frontier town of Red Creek woke beneath a golden morning sun, but for Daniel Harper, every sunrise brought another impossible choice. Once a respected rancher with healthy cattle and a loving wife, life had turned cruel within a single year. A deadly fever had stolen his wife Emily only days after their son Noah was born. Then came a harsh drought that killed most of his herd. Debt followed like a hungry wolf, forcing Daniel to sell nearly everything he owned just to keep the tiny ranch alive. Now only a weathered cabin, one tired horse, and his infant son remained. Wrapped carefully in a faded brown blanket, baby Noah rested quietly in Daniel's arms as he stepped into Red Creek General Store. The warm smell of flour, coffee, and fresh bread filled the room, but Daniel noticed only the can of condensed milk resting on the counter. The old shopkeeper smiled sadly. "Morning, Daniel." Daniel removed his worn hat. "I need to return this." The shopkeeper frowned. "You bought it yesterday." "I know." Daniel stared at the floor. "But I found only 3 pennies at home. I can't afford it anymore." The baby stirred softly, searching for food. Several customers turned toward them. One woman quietly wiped her eyes. The shopkeeper sighed. "I wish I could help, son." Daniel nodded. "I understand." He gently placed the milk on the wooden counter. "I'll find another way." He wasn't asking for charity. He never had. His pride was the only thing poverty hadn't taken from him. Standing quietly near a shelf of fabric and lantern oil was Eleanor Brooks, the wealthiest widow in 3 counties. Since losing her husband years earlier, she had become known for her generosity, though few recognized her, because she dressed simply instead of wearing expensive clothes. She had watched the entire exchange without speaking. What caught her attention wasn't Daniel's poverty. It was his dignity. He never begged, never complained, never blamed anyone. Instead, he chose hunger for himself rather than debt he couldn't repay. As Daniel turned toward the door carrying his sleepy son, Noah suddenly began crying loudly from hunger. Daniel's face tightened with pain. He gently rocked the baby. "I'm sorry, little man," he whispered. "We'll figure something out." Those words struck Eleanor harder than any sermon she had ever heard. She watched the exhausted father leave the store with empty hands. Most customers simply shook their heads before returning to their shopping. But Eleanor remained perfectly still. Finally, she looked toward the shopkeeper. "How much does he owe you?" The old man quietly answered, "More than money can measure." Eleanor smiled softly. "No," she whispered. "I wasn't asking about the number." She looked toward the dusty road where Daniel disappeared carrying his son. She already knew what she was going to do. It would not be charity. It would not embarrass him. And before another sunset arrived, the struggling rancher's entire future would begin to change forever. Daniel carried Noah home with a heavy heart. The baby's hungry cries echoed through the quiet valley, each sound cutting deeper than the last. Inside the small cabin, Daniel searched every shelf, every cupboard, and every sack, hoping he had overlooked something. There was nothing except a handful of beans and a little cornmeal. He boiled water, pretending to stay busy while Noah cried in his arms. Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "I'm trying, son," he whispered. "Your father is trying." Meanwhile, Eleanor Brooks rode her wagon toward the Harper Ranch, but not with baskets of food or bags of money. She understood that a man who valued his dignity would refuse charity. She needed another way. When she reached the cabin, Daniel looked surprised to see the wealthy widow standing at his door. He straightened his shoulders and politely removed his hat. "My mole, is something wrong?" Eleanor smiled kindly. "I've come with a business proposal." Daniel looked confused. "A proposal?" "Yes," she replied. "My late husband owned several grazing fields east of town. The fences have fallen apart, the barns need repairs, and no foreman has stayed longer than a month. I need someone honest to manage the property." Daniel lowered his eyes. I'm honored, but I don't think I can leave Noah alone. I wouldn't ask you to. She looked at the baby with a gentle smile. You may bring him every day. Daniel hesitated. I've heard others say you could hire any man in this county. I could, Eleanor answered, but I can't hire character. That is earned. Daniel stood silently, unable to answer. Then Eleanor added one final sentence. The wages begin today, whether you accept or not. Daniel shook his head. I can't take money I haven't worked for. She smiled. Good, because I don't give charity. I offer honest work. Those words reached his heart. For the first time in months, Daniel felt that someone saw him as more than a poor widower. The next morning, he arrived before sunrise carrying Noah in a handmade sling across his chest. While Daniel repaired broken fences and cleared fallen timber, Eleanor quietly arranged a small cradle inside the ranch office where Noah could sleep safely nearby. As the days passed, Daniel worked harder than anyone Eleanor had ever hired. Every repaired gate, every rebuilt corral, and every restored pasture reflected the pride he still carried despite his hardships. The ranch slowly came back to life. Workers noticed the change, so that's why she hired him, one cowboy admitted. He's worth 3 men. Eleanor simply smiled. She had known it from the beginning. At the end of Daniel's first week, she handed him a small leather pay envelope. His hands trembled. The first thing he did was ride straight back to the general store. The old shopkeeper watched as Daniel proudly placed coins on the counter. I'd like 2 cans of milk. He smiled for the first time in many months, and a little flour. The shopkeeper nodded with watery eyes. You earned every penny. Daniel looked down at Noah sleeping peacefully in his arms. For the first time since Emily's passing, hope had returned to his home. But neither Daniel nor Eleanor realized that the greatest test of their growing friendship, and the miracle that would unite their lives forever, was still waiting just beyond the horizon. Winter slowly faded, and for the first time in nearly a year, laughter could be heard again at the Harper cabin. Baby Noah was healthy. The ranch under Daniel's care was thriving, and every morning, Eleanor Brooks found herself looking forward to Daniel's quiet smile more than she cared to admit. Yet the town had begun to whisper. Some said the rich widow felt sorry for him. Others claimed Daniel only worked for her because he needed money. Neither rumor was true. What existed between them was something far stronger than pity. It was respect. One evening, after finishing repairs on the eastern pasture, Daniel stood outside the barn while Noah slept peacefully in his arms. Eleanor approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've rebuilt nearly everything my husband left behind, she said softly. Daniel shook his head. No, you rebuilt me. Eleanor looked away, hiding tears. For years after her husband's death, wealth had surrounded her, but loneliness had remained. People respected her money. Very few cared about her heart. Daniel had never once treated her like a wealthy widow. He simply treated her like Eleanor. Days later, the annual town gathering arrived. Nearly everyone in Red Creek gathered outside the church hall. Ranchers, merchants, and townsfolk filled the square. Then Eleanor stepped forward. The crowd immediately grew silent. Beside her stood Daniel holding Noah. Many assumed she was announcing a business partnership. They were wrong. Eleanor unfolded a document. My husband left me more land than I could ever care for alone, she began. For years I believed success meant keeping everything. She paused. I was mistaken. The crowd listened carefully. She turned toward Daniel. This man came to work with empty pockets but a full heart. He never asked for charity. He earned every opportunity with honesty, sacrifice, and love for his son. Daniel lowered his eyes, embarrassed by the attention. Then Eleanor spoke the words that shocked everyone. I am giving Daniel ownership of half the eastern ranch. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Eleanor, I can't accept that. She smiled warmly. Yes, you can. It's not charity. It's an investment in the finest man I've ever known. The entire town stood speechless, but Eleanor wasn't finished. She gently touched Noah's tiny hand. And if you'll allow it. Her voice trembled. I'd like to become part of this family too. Daniel froze. For months he had buried feelings he believed he had no right to have. He looked at Eleanor, not at her wealth, Not at the land, at her kindness, at the woman who had saved his son's life without ever stealing his dignity. Tears filled his eyes. "No one has stood beside me since Emily died," he whispered. Eleanor quietly replied, "No one has stood beside me since my husband passed." Daniel smiled through tears. "Then perhaps neither of us should stand alone anymore." The crowd erupted into applause. Some cried openly. Others bowed their heads in silence, because everyone understood what had truly happened. A wealthy widow had not rescued a poor man. Two lonely hearts had rescued each other. Months later, laughter filled the ranch house every evening. Noah took his first steps across the wooden floor, while Eleanor and Daniel watched together beside the fireplace. Their home had not been built with wealth. It had been built with compassion, with dignity, with kindness, and with love, because sometimes the greatest miracle isn't receiving help. It's meeting someone who helps you without ever making you feel small. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. Because sometimes one act of compassion can become an entire future.